In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet in real life, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful, and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved, not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous world were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mechagodzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from base. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional, because after the first 2 questions at the start, Face started to take on a darker tone. Do you like ice cream? Yes. Do you like clowns? Yes. Is time slipping through your fingers? Yes. Do you have any regrets? Yes. Do some people deserve to die? No. Is it safe to go out at night? Yes. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Yes. Have you ever killed anyone? No. Do you want to kill anyone? No. Are you actually accomplishing anything? No. Does life have any real meaning? No. Do you like Mothra? I knew the last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I have no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game, and there's a good reason for that. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back into the corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra had was being able to fly over obstacles in some other levels. So I answered no, and Base actually replied back to me. Not only with the maniacal expression, but with the text, "Too bad." I was taken back to the map of the screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and the gears had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed. But there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet that even if I had said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyway. Face giveth, and face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one since there turns out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me, even more than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. I've always been afraid of being in the forest at night. Something about all those trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact that I was stuck as Mothra didn't help either. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery. Being control of the king of the monsters, I'd be able to handle things just about anything in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed butterfly traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. It gave me this feeling that I was introduced to some dangerous place I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage. Or at least I assumed there were enemies. They were strange, long-legged deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking me, they were just idly running away. I went to approach them, but they ran off. I thought about shooting one with the eye beam to see what would happen, but it seems wrong. These creatures were harmless. So I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of deer-like animals and two new creatures. A sloth creature with a beak climbing on a tree, and a hairy raptor beasts that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape, but I got clawed at. But the confrontation was easily avoided by flying up on top of the screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play levels through the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not at all what I expected. When I pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen like normally I would, this screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing in the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it had a strange feel to it. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looks just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect of the rest of the icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level, all brown with time measuring instruments floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen, and very early in the level, I encountered something else I did not expect. Original enemies from the game. And not just that, it seemed to be a whole fleet of them. And the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could move now. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. Number 1, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the levels with enemies from the past. Number 2, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level with enemies from the future. Number 3, a green hourglass that set time to a normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down and I saw enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment, and I encountered the green hourglass. And then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots. But in the last segment, I encountered the red hourglass, and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will actually exist thousands of years into the Earth's future, I have no idea. But with that in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it was made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called Truden Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of future creatures, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving alone for me to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose you could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a power-up and health that restored the health and energy I had lost fighting it, which is convenient. It seems I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After that previous stage I called Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looks grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambitious synthetic song. Listening to it makes me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself. And it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt I was choking while playing it. The enemies all seemed to be muted from the degree. And above the screenshots, you could see green mummies with bird skulls that jumped out of the waste to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with a teeter-like tongue. I was moving over trying to make it stop, but this flock of skullbirds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health from killing all of them. They were extremely weak. I pursued onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most, quote, normal, in that there was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula in the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like tentacled blobs, and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of birds now and then. At the end of the level was a large bluish-green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss, some kind of a monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacked with a mouth projectile like charging into you. It could go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as soon as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest icon level I hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree. As I guessed, the level was a winter theme recolored of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous, covered in snow. I traveled through the segment, enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when suddenly I realized something. I haven't seen a creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after, I left the screen and the second segment started. In the second segment, I was in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, and this was like another one of those. But then, I heard something familiar. It was a 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have been all froze to death. One closer inspections, some were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state, and sure enough, I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more like a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to see at least one alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors who must have sensed that something else was still alive came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from their temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight. One was running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sound different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't say who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 has returned, and immediately I started to feel dread. I know this is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake, and then the moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus, I was introduced to a monster I call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight. And it was the most difficult fight yet, stronger than any of the previous bosses. This creature would have been hard to take down even with Godzilla, and with Mothra it seems nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gigan's buzzsaw, because if it had, I would have never won this fight. I barely had 3 life bars when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterward is hardly what I call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I had to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about this, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in the field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran right into traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked at her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know the game knows about this, because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. After that, the game went back to the boarding screen. It was all I could do not to burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go so far, or that it was even capable of what it was doing, like what it just did. I could feel my brain going haywire as I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? But that didn't seem possible. But what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what seemed obvious. The game is alive. And not only that, it can establish some kind of mental connection with the player, and yet I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity. But even with the previous revelations, I really wanted to see this through the end, even more than I did before I beat dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried to restart the game, it might go back to be normal again. How many people get to ever witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take a screenshot of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn the TV off if I felt like I was in extreme danger just in case. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall or just run out of the room. And surely enough, that would definitely be enough. Whatever the power the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't able to understand this. I took a break for a few minutes just to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV icon right below the white forest I had just left. And because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try another to see what happens. Although I expected the same animation, I actually got a totally different one. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fisherman at all. I can't help but wonder what the point of these things are. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have had a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that, and I started up in a gold Labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled. Not sure how or why, but I was glad not to be heading in the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that my Mothra sprite had shrunk to half its original size. The music was a slow, ominous drum beat, with female vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite haunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seems necessary just to get around this place. Another thing that caught my attention was that when you go left, your monster ends up turning and faces the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but in the original game, you were only supposed to move to the right. So when you try to move left, your monster ended up walking or flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size, because every time I had thought I reached an end to it, or I thought I was going to end up back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. I found one statue face at the end with a wide, open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. Even when she got hit by a truck, she still had the same expression. I can't help a feeling but like there's something is staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded about that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I saw something. It was a creature that was not gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in the level. lacking any kind of hover abilities like the other creatures. It just walked back and forth on the platform, but it wasn't there for long after I found it. Then a flying machine swooped down and grabbed the creature, and then flew off with it. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered around the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged and a hole in the cauldron's side, now annoyed in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it because I found the exit soon enough. When I got back to the board, I realized that the bosses hadn't moved yet. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made my planning route through Entropy easier. There were still 2 new icons to explore, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the Labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black Labyrinth icons, which were surrounded by the bosses, I played the Indigo Cliffs first. It was a lot like the blue/green mountains. The graphics had the same shredded paper look to it, like usual. There's also a recolored of the clouds and the moon from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you could call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made synchronized shaking sound, and they all walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, so I followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave, until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that upon reaching the cliff, all the creatures began jumping off into the abyss. Okay, look, I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. That's very unsettling to start off a level that way. I continued on flying over various strange animals like the ones shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by large birds, which I'm fairly certain are the sprite versions of the giant condor from the Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster film. I defeated some of the condors in battle, but it bothered me to see that these bobbleheads seemed to be so eager to die. If this game is alive, perhaps the creatures in this level are also alive and have some very unhappy lives. If this behavior is indication, but what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching up to a large monster being devoured. This was starting to disgust me. So acting on impulse, I fired off eye beams at the monster and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry and ran off the remaining bobbleheads to bite me. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless, but it was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the boss battles. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that, I will watch the last TV screen play the Black Labyrinth before fighting Mechagodzilla. And lastly, go through the chase with the Hellbees. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, it's time to beat up Batra. As I suspected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varen's battle theme. Whatever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, that other form always shows up. For a game that's otherwise inexplicable, it's rather startling in its continuity and accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The fight started off as simple. Larva Batra fought in a similar fashion as Maguma did, charging back and forth and occasionally firing off a lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Mothra's combat capabilities had been altered in my favor. The I-beam did twice as much damage as they did originally. Now they were as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did a nice thing where it would actually hit an enemy when you use it. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back the same way as if you were just ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying, but not anymore. I could change directions and fly around, which was a big help, because fighting Imago Batra is like fighting a clone Mothra, although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger, no longer impeded by its slow-moving larva form. Imago Batra was fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the horn lightning, it now had a new, more powerful I-beam. Batra could change directions just like I could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like, but first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a lot of creatures just for health power-ups. So, about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one and so far only film appearance. He was a lot like Mugera, but much faster and with more weapons. He'd start out charging off with his drills. I like to fly back and forth around him, which seems to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back and turn around and start spinning out grenades. Those were a pain because they bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under it and then shot him with I-beams. Overall, I describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was near the end of Entropy. I had taken down Megalon, and I started up the last TV screen to see what I get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was the password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent in comparison with the other two. The whole game seems to be growing more valiant. As when I on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't finished before. Most likely it was just the tension from all that had happened in this game getting to me. But who knows? The last level type on Entropy is what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambience, similar to the unforgiving Cold Loop, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute, and I noticed that there wasn't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then this might be a good thing. Maybe there wouldn't be any obstacles and I could get through the level with ease. Then the screen went dark, and immediately I snapped out of my daze from a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the Mothra sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going and ended up frankly running into walls. I heard a noise, the sound of a crowd running through the hallway, and along the running came the roars. Loud roaring sounds, which I would describe as something like a rabid dog the size of an elephant screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever is making this noise, there were lots of them. I knew something was there, but it wasn't until I took some screenshots editing that I got to see what my pursuits looked like. But at the time, I couldn't see what there were or where I was going. I was literally running blind, and this mob of the beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was, NO! As I was sawing my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half of my total health. When I was saved, the light came back on, and the attackers had disappeared. And so, the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out, and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in panic mode now. Moving fast I could go while even trying every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead meat had it not been for one of the one-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to all avoid me until the light came back. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. But before the exit, there was a row of halls leading straight down, with no way out once entered. You either go to the exit before the monsters reach you, or you die. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss to go. Mechagodzilla. I started the battle and I got something very unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back to 100% again, it seems to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla! But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Mechagodzilla started off as a fake Godzilla, like fighting a clone Godzilla, but his disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually, a transformation only occurred at the halfway point. At this point, it was like fighting Mechagodzilla in the normal game. It felt kinda nice to fight one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly like normal. He also had rainbow eye beams and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him in the corner and hitting with eye beams in a spot where he can't hit me. But that was also cheap tricks in any way. But after getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch in much the way as Godzilla had back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to form a new shape. And thus, the game had created not Mechagodzilla. I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreating things. The human face on this one gives it a very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it also was slower than any of its original counterparts and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by constantly staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison powder. I flew it over. One last thing to do. The Hellbeast chase. Oh boy. I might as well just get this over with, I thought. The Entropy end chase ended up exactly what I was afraid of it would be. A Labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took all out of it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth would be, or where the exit was. And now, not only I had to constantly backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red beast. As for the first 30 seconds, it didn't show up, but I knew it would. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard a loud flapping noise, and there it was in a flying form. It flew with bat-like wings, and it was faster and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this is probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. As such, I had to keep my focus on the game and not take screenshots. However, I did take one of the red monster doing I found very interesting. I had managed to lose it by going through a different path than it apparently expected, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth. Or so I thought. It tried to claw through the wall for a second before opening its mouth and tearing down the wall apart with its intestine jaws. But for those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might be the key to me finding the exit. The path to exit was long and complex, but from what I remembered, I went up and then back to the left. I'm not sure why I chose that particular way, just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I was hoping that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. Next, Exodus.